Hey guys, you've heard stories of power, betrayal, and blood in ancient Rome. You've heard of emperors seated on thrones of gold, of legions that marched beneath blood-red banners, and of senate chambers where words killed more swiftly than swords. But what if I told you that one of the most powerful rooms in the Roman Empire, perhaps even more influential than the Senate itself, was one no historian ever dares to sketch? A room hidden behind velvet drapes and ceremonial walls, just steps behind the emperor's golden throne. A chamber that doesn't appear on floor plans, wasn't marked on scrolls, and was never mentioned in public forums. A place where politics didn't end, but began. Imagine walking through the stone halls of the Palatine Hill, past guards in larica segmentata armor, standing like statues, past busts of dead gods and emperors with eyes that never blink, into a chamber that even the palace architects pretended not to know. It was behind a false bookshelf in the Emperor Domitian's library. They say a carved panel that only opened when pressed in the right sequence. Minerva's owl, then the laurel leaf, then the serpent biting its own tail. Click, silence. And then, the smell. Not of old scrolls or incense, but of perfume. A kind not sold in Roman markets. A rare Syrian blend of amber and crushed black fig, illegal for commoners, and reserved only for the elite. And in that scent-soaked darkness stood a room unlike anything else in the empire. Velvet couches the color of drying blood. Candelabras made of ivory from Nubia. Walls painted with scenes so explicit, even brothel walls blushed in comparison. But most disturbing were not the objects, but the people. They were women, yes, but also boys dressed as women, and men dressed as gods, and even slaves painted in gold leaf from head to toe, standing still like living statues, their eyes trained downward as if trying to unsee everything. These were not courtesans. These were not prostitutes. These were weapons selected not for beauty alone, but for memory, for silence, for their ability to whisper and forget in the same breath. Some were the children of debtors, sold at 14. Some were oracles whose visions had been stolen by imperial decree. And some, they say, were not even Roman gifts from conquered provinces. Wrapped in silk and silence, delivered like tribute to the feet of emperors, too proud to beg, and too afraid to be alone. The emperors called this room Lupanarium Regia, the royal den, but no one outside the palace dared utter its name, because what happened in that room didn't stay there. The girl who poured Domitian's wine one night might be the one who whispered in the ear of his general the next morning. The boy who lay beside Tiberius could recite troop movements better than a legionary. And every pillow, every robe, every sigh and moan was a currency traded behind curtains. They say one emperor passed 3 new laws after a single evening in that chamber, laws that destroyed 2 senators, elevated a foreign merchant to nobility, and quietly erased a scandal from the public archives. No one knew why, but the next morning, a concubine was seen walking barefoot out of the emperor's chamber, holding a small bronze medallion with a scorpion engraved on it, and that was enough. By nightfall, Rome had changed. The scorpion meant silence, and silence meant power. You see, to rule Rome wasn't about swords and eagles. It was about secrets. And the emperors didn't just keep secrets, they slept with them. In that room behind the throne, moans weren't just expressions of pleasure, they were the sound of empires shifting. And if you listened closely enough, between the creak of ancient wood and the flicker of torchlight, you might still hear the breath of a slave girl who once held the fate of 1,000 men in her trembling fingers. But of course, none of this was written. No scrolls mention Lupanarium Regia. No poet dared describe it. And yet, marble dust clings to the walls where fingerprints should not be. A faint perfume still lingers where time should have erased it, and behind the last column of the imperial chamber, a hairline crack runs along the floor like a whisper, waiting to be heard. What lies beneath that crack? Who walked through that door in the dead of night? And why did every emperor, even the most pious, spend so much time in a room no one would ever admit existed? We'll get to that. But first, let's go further. Let's follow the eunuch's lantern down the second corridor. Because what you're about to hear next isn't just more disturbing. It's deliberately forgotten. And the girl waiting at the end of this hallway, she's not what she seems. None of them were. Hey guys, The hallway behind the throne was never lit by more than a single oil lamp, swinging gently from the hand of a eunuch named Seleucus, who hadn't spoken a word since the age of 12, when his tongue was cut out in exchange for loyalty. He'd been bought from a Cappadocian salt mine, branded behind the ear with the imperial seal, and trained not in swordplay or scholarship, but in discretion. He knew every passage beneath the palace, every false door behind every mosaic, and more importantly, he knew who came and went from the emperor's secret chamber, and when. His job wasn't to judge, it was to guide, and on this particular night, his lamp guided a barefoot girl of 17, with a single copper ring around her ankle. Not shackles, no, but close enough to remind her she didn't belong to herself. Her name, they say, was Aloria. But the name wasn't Roman. It was from Gaul, the forested lands where mist clings to the pines, and children are taught to fear the silence more than the wolves. She'd been taken in a border raid, dragged by chain to Massilia, then shipped like cargo to Ostia. They say she didn't cry when she arrived. Not once. Not when they shaved her hair. Not when they taught her to speak Latin in a week by beating her hands for every wrong syllable. And not when she was brought to the palace with her wrists bound in silk, as if that made it prettier. No. Aloria didn't cry, because crying was a language she had burned out of herself. The first time she entered the emperor's private hall, she didn't look at the statues, or the gold, or the opium-laced wine in the goblets. She looked at Seleucus, straight into his eyes, and for a brief second, the eunuch's lamp flickered, as if ashamed. She was not beautiful in the Roman way. Her teeth were imperfect, her skin was freckled, and her shoulders bore faint welts from a northern lash. But she carried herself like someone who had walked out of a burning forest with no intention of explaining how the fire started. The emperor, Commodus, was expecting someone else that night, a polished concubine from Alexandria, trained in poetry and poisons. But when Aloria stepped into the room and looked at him as though he were made of wood and not marble, he dismissed the Alexandrian with a wave and said, "Let this one speak." And speak she did, but not with words. She recited a lullaby while staring directly at the emperor. A tune so haunting, it made even the guards outside shift uncomfortably. It wasn't what she said, it was the way she sang it, like someone recounting a death that hadn't happened yet. That night, Commodus didn't touch her. He listened, and by dawn, he'd ordered 3 senators imprisoned, 1 governor exiled, and a minor noble, who happened to oversee the Gaulish slave routes, executed without trial. Rome whispered about a ghost in the palace. Some said a druid priestess had cursed the emperor's bed. Others believed Aloria was simply mad. But she was brought back again, and each time Commodus grew quieter, more erratic, more obsessed with invisible threats and messages hidden in dream. He began to wear Gallic robes, in private. He painted a stag's head on his wall, and one night, when his guards burst into the secret chamber after hearing screams, they found him alone, on his knees, whispering the same lullaby over and over with blood on his mouth. Aloria was gone. Seleucus never said what happened to her, but for months after, a copper ring was found buried beneath the emperor's pillow each morning. Even after the chamber was sealed, no matter how many times it was thrown out, it returned. Some say it was a ghost. Others believe it was Seleucus himself, leaving behind a reminder of the night the emperor gave his soul to a girl who never asked for it. And yet, the most disturbing part wasn't the ghost, or the song, or the ring. It was what Commodus did next. He created a position within the palace, a secret role known only to his closest inner circle, called Silent Advisor. The role had no official duties, no salary, no seat in the Senate, but every edict, every law, every execution afterward was signed with a tiny symbol beside his imperial seal, a tree split by lightning. Aloria's people had worn the same symbol on their cloaks, and that's when Rome truly began to rot, because, for all his cruelty and madness, Commodus had learned something that most emperors never did. Real power doesn't come from armies. It comes from the voices no one else hears. And sometimes, those voices wear copper rings and walk barefoot through the palace at night. You won't find this in any scroll. The historians erased it. The Senate destroyed every document bearing the symbol. But the crack in the floor behind the throne, it's still there. And if you listen closely, very closely, in the silence between torchlight and shadow. You might hear that lullaby echoing, softly, as if someone long forgotten is still watching, still waiting, still whispering from behind the wall. Hey guys, there's a room beneath the Palatine Hill that no one speaks of. Not because it is cursed. Curses are for peasants and grave robbers. But because to name it aloud is to invite silence. Not the kind that settles after a feast, or before a speech, but the kind of silence that thickens the air like tar, makes the birds forget to sing, and causes the guards to glance behind their backs, though they know no one is there. This chamber, unofficially known only as by those few who dared whisper of it, was designed by an architect who vanished before the final stone was laid. No blueprint survived. No one recalled hiring him. And yet, the marble was polished, the hinges oiled, and the doors sealed with imperial authority. The room's sole feature was its walls, endless mirrors. Not Roman glass, no, something older, impossibly smooth, too cold to touch without blistering. They reflected not just the body, but the breath, the thoughts behind the eyes, the lies sewn into the flesh. And at the center of that room, surrounded by a perfect ring of reflection, stood a stool, plain wooden, and cruel in its simplicity. That's where Senator Decimus Aelius found himself one night, though he never spoke of how he was summoned. He was no fool. A man of discipline, appointed by Marcus Aurelius himself, Decimus believed in order, hierarchy, and the rule of reason. That belief began to crumble the moment the door closed behind him and he saw not one reflection, but 7. Each moved slightly out of sync, a blink too slow, a breath too shallow, a smile where none belonged. The reflections did not obey, they did not mimic, they watched. For a while, he stood in silence. Then, a voice not his own, but somehow, from his own mouth, asked, "What would you confess if no gods were listening?" That's when the lights dimmed, not by torches or lamps, but by something deeper, like the mirrors themselves, swallowed the light in hunger. The first hour passed in stillness. The second, in questions. Not spoken aloud, but poured into his mind, like wine too bitter to spit out. Every crime he had buried, the bribes, the bathhouse incident, the boy with the broken fingers, rose, unbidden. By the third hour, he was begging. Not for forgiveness, but for memory. Because something strange had begun. He could no longer remember which face was his. Each reflection shifted slightly, becoming younger, older, bruised, bald, bloodied, until they all looked like versions of him that could have been, or might still be. That's when one stepped forward. Just one. The mirror didn't crack, it bent. The glass rippled like water, and the thing behind it smiled. Not cruelly, pityingly. It said only, "You thought the Senate was power. You thought the empire could be ruled with ink and applause. We have always ruled from behind the mirror." He awoke in his villa, 5 miles south of Rome, screaming into silk pillows. His slave said he had been gone a single night. But his beard had grown out 3 inches. His fingernails were torn and bloodied. He had clawed at stone. Stone no one could find. For the rest of his life, Decimus Aelius never entered a room with mirrors. He resigned from the Senate within the month, citing spiritual illness. But the worst part, he began to speak to someone only he could see. Always to his left, always in whispers. And he wasn't the only one. Over the next year, 5 other senators vanished. 2 were found hanging from olive trees with copper coins placed on their tongues. 1 was discovered beneath the Tiber Bridge, smiling with no eyes. And each time, a guard reported seeing a barefoot woman in the vicinity, always just leaving, never caught. The imperial court denied the chamber's existence. The emperor's physicians claimed mass hysteria. But the servants knew. They'd long since stopped polishing that section of the palace floor. Not because it was forbidden, but because, no matter how often they cleaned, their own reflections never left that wall. Even when they walked away. Rome was beginning to fracture. Not from war, not from plague, but from within. The specularium still exists, according to some mad scribes. Sealed behind 7 walls, and a false pantry, buried so deep, not even the rats will go near. And yet, on the coldest nights, when the fog curls like fingers around the columns, a faint humming can be heard beneath the marble. A lullaby, A northern tune. One no Roma never learned, but every shadow seems to know by heart. Hey guys, you've heard of Spartacus, maybe even Commodus, with his twisted hunger for the arena. But there was one name whispered only by torchlight in the underbelly of Rome, a name the records deliberately erased. A name scratched into the walls of the Colosseum's darkest cells. Avelius, the Unburned. He wasn't born in Rome. No one knows exactly where he came from. Some said he arrived chained to a Phoenician vessel that washed ashore after its entire crew had vanished. Others claimed he was captured in the snowy north, a giant of a man who walked barefoot across ice and laughed at blades. He didn't speak for his first 3 years as a slave. But the first time he stepped into the arena, the silence shattered. He killed 12 men in the time it took a priest to finish his prayer. They called it divine rage, but the priests were uneasy. One of them, an augur named Vedius, said the man's blood didn't boil like other mortals, that when he pierced Avelius' skin with a needle during a sacrificial offering, the drop that rose was not red, but black, and it hissed when it touched the marble. They thought it a trick, until the bodies started disappearing. Not the ones he fought, they were carted out, like all the rest. It was the judges, the sponsors, the rich men who wagered against him. Their corpses were never found. But their eyes, only their eyes, would turn up in the offering bowls the next morning, still wet, as if freshly plucked. Avelius did not sleep. They tried, drugged him, gassed him, beat him with rods, but he would lie on his stone slab, eyes open, staring into the dark as if watching something approach, something only he could see. The turning point came during the festival of Vulcan, when the emperor himself, Lucius Septimius Severus, attended to watch Avelius face off against an opponent no man had ever defeated, the Nubian champion, Baccharseth, a man who was rumored to be part lion. Raised in temples where children were trained to kill jackals with their teeth, the fight began with laughter. Avelius did not bow. He didn't even raise his arms. Baccharseth struck first, splitting Avelius's side with a curved blade, spilling what should have been blood. But what poured out was steam, thick and sulphurous. The stench caused 2 senators to vomit in their silk sleeves. Then Avelius smiled, not with joy, not with fury, but with relief, as if pain was the permission he had been waiting for. What happened next was not a fight. It was a message. He tore Bacchus' heart out, not with a sword, but with his bare hand. No scream, just silence. As the heart hit the sand, it burst into flame. The arena, for the first time in its history, emptied before the games were over. That night, lightning struck the temple of Jupiter 3 times. The priests called for fasting. The emperor called for his immediate execution. But when they opened Avelius's cell, it was empty. No blood, no broken locks. Just one sentence carved into the wall. I have killed one god. Another waits beneath. Rome panic spread. The emperor issued a decree, banning all further mention of the gladiator. Scribes were killed. Murals repainted. But still, Avelius returned. Every few years, a slave would go missing from the gladiator schools. A soldier would turn up flayed, symbols burned into their chest. Once a young boy swore he saw a giant man crouching beneath the aqueducts, whispering to the rats. There, listening now, he said. The old ones. The ones buried under the old stones. I opened the gate when I killed him. I didn't mean to, historians scoff. They call it urban myth. Yet to this day, there is one door beneath the Colosseum, a small wooden arch, sealed with iron and salt, that no one opens. Even the tour guides won't approach it. And if you press your ear to that door, some say you'll hear breathing, slow, heavy, patient, as if whatever lies behind it is not sleeping, just waiting. Rome has many ghosts, but Avelius is not one of them. Ghosts are dead. He is not. He is something else. Something Rome tried to erase, and in doing so, may have released something far worse. Hey guys, Rome has had madmen monsters, and messiahs with a purple cloak of power, but none quite like the one who was never crowned, never named in stone, and yet ruled from behind the curtain like a puppeteer with bloodied strings. A man known only in whispers, as the Umbra. No birth record, no lineage, no family tomb, And yet during the final years of Emperor Caracalla's reign, policies changed, wars erupted, temples fell, and coinage bore the faint outline of a face. That was not the emperor's, a longer nose, hollowed eyes, lips that curved in neither smile nor frown, but something in between, like a cruel joke being swallowed. At first, the Senate blamed paranoia. Caracalla, known for his fits and massacres, often ranted about a mirror man he saw at dusk, one who stood where his reflection should be, one who offered advice without moving his lips. Servants dismissed it, until they saw the same man, not in mirrors, but in corridors. Always, just at the edge of vision, silent, still smiling that awful, unfinished smile. He began appearing in the dreams of high officials. At first vague, then vivid, men woke up with Latin phrases etched into their palms and bruises. Faci me oculi. Tuis make me your eyes. Several leaped from their balconies, after reciting the same phrase repeatedly in different languages they did not speak. The Treasury Master wrote a full policy change in his sleep, a document now sealed in the Vatican archives, said to predict the stockpiling of grain futures and the eventual collapse of 5 future empires. But this wasn't madness, it was control. Caracalla's last year as emperor was marked by uncanny precision, war plans that seemed to anticipate every enemy move, assassinations carried out before they were plotted, entire provinces subdued, without a single sword raised. But when questioned on strategy, he merely looked up, confused, and whispered, "He told me it was already done." On the morning of his death in 217 AD, Caracalla was found wandering outside Antioch barefoot, eyes white, muttering about how the sun no longer casts shadows, just before his own guard stabbed him from behind. Here's where it gets darker. That guard, Julius Martialus, didn't flee. He just sat beside the emperor's body, staring at his own shadow. When asked why he committed the murder, he simply replied, "Because he promised to give me back my reflection," then bit off his own tongue. Years passed, the Umbra was forgotten, until Diocletian rose to power and claimed to have found the lost imperial codex. Within it, a chapter titled De Umbra Regnarum, on the shadow of kingdoms. It described in chilling detail a being that does not rule through might, but memory, a parasitic consciousness that attaches to rulers on the brink of madness, offering wisdom that feels ancient, but comes at the cost of identity. Some historians believe it's metaphor, but then why did Diocletian order the burning of every mirror in the imperial palace? Why did he refuse to be painted or sculpted unless the room was lit only by fire? And why, after his mysterious abdication, did his personal physician record in his journal, "The emperor dreams of being watched, but not from this world, from within"? In modern Rome, there's an unmarked chamber beneath the Palatine Hill, sealed by 12 locks. A Vatican-funded expedition briefly opened it in 1932 and sealed it the same day. All members died within a year, most by suicide. Their final journal entries, hastily scrawled, were nearly identical. He watches through the cracks. Rome may have buried its kings and burned its heretics, but it never found the body of the Umbra, because he was never a body at all, just a presence, a suggestion, a shadow that never left, and might now be whispering behind the eyes of someone else, someone you might even vote for, admire, trust. After all, the first lesson the Umbra teaches is how to disappear in plain sight. The second, how to make others thank you for obeying. Hey guys, before emperors ruled and legions marched, before Rome raised its eagle high and stained the world red with conquest, there was only fire, not the kind that burns cities, but the sacred kind that keeps them alive. And at the heart of that eternal flame were the Vestal virgins, chosen as little girls, cloistered for 30 years, forbidden to speak too loud, laugh too hard, or ever touch a man. Their purity wasn't just symbolic, it was the glue holding the Republic's divine favor together. They were Rome's spiritual insurance policy. One violation, and it was said the gods would turn their backs, and one day, they did, officially. Only 10 Vestals ever broke their vow over Rome's 1,000-year reign. But the 11th was never recorded, because what she unleashed could not be contained by scroll or statue. She had no name. The marble inscription were her identity. should have been chiseled, was left blank, scratched out, or deliberately melted with acid, depending on which surviving fragment you trust. But the stories agree on this. She was the youngest ever chosen, 9 years old, and by 17, she was seen staring into the sacred flame for hours at a time, whispering things in Old Etruscan, a language already extinct. Other Vestals avoided her. Animals refused to cross her path. One night, the flame went out. That had only happened once before, during Hannibal's invasion. But this time, there was no enemy at the gate. Just silence and blood. A male guard was found, disemboweled beside the altar, entrails wrapped in the shape of a spiral, an ancient symbol for eternal return. The nameless Vestal vanished. A citywide manhunt began, but there were no signs of struggle, no trail. Just a rumor. She had descended into the Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer of Rome, and never returned. Then the plagues began. First livestock miscarriages, then crops rotted from the inside out. By autumn, babies were being born without eyes, and a senator's wife woke screaming with all her hair turned white. The city blamed the gods. The priests blamed foreign cults. But in the Senate chamber, one old augur, blind in one eye and reeking of sulfur, muttered, "She took the fire with her. And now Rome will learn what it means to grow cold." Years later, during the reign of Claudius, an expedition was sent into the deepest chambers beneath the Temple of Vesta. They found a second chamber, hidden behind the main. Vault 1 no architect could explain. At its center was a stone altar, scorched black, with no trace of flame, just ash, thick, clumped, still warm to the touch, centuries later. There were carvings all around the walls, depicting scenes that had not yet happened. The Colosseum in ruins, crosses on a hill outside Jerusalem, even what some interpret as tanks. Yes, machines with treads, crushing columns of marble. Scholars laughed it off. Until 1943, when Allied tanks rolled into Rome, and a photo was taken from a precise angle outside the Colosseum, matching one of the carvings exactly. The Vatican sealed the chamber permanently the next week. So who? Was she a prophet? A victim? Or something worse? A vessel that had stared into the flame, and seen not the gods, but what came before them. Some believe she didn't break her vow. They believe she fulfilled a deeper one, not to Rome, but to an older order, one that once ruled in fire, silence, and ash. Today, when tourists visit the ruins of the Temple of Vesta, they see only pretty columns and plaques. But every few years, a child goes missing nearby. Always girls. Always between 8 and 10 years old. No bodies, no sounds. Just a faint smell of smoke. And once, carved into the side of a fallen pillar, the same spiral. Rome was built on law, war, and gods. But beneath all that, it was built on secrets too dangerous to name. The nameless Vestal wasn't forgotten. She was buried, alive, with her flame. And some say, she's still breathing, somewhere deep, below, warming her hands for the day. She walks the streets again, not as a virgin priestess, but as the mother of a new fire. Hey guys, now imagine this. A room with no windows, lined with obsidian walls so smooth that even candlelight disappears into them. At its center, a long marble table, still set for 20 guests, plates untouched, goblets frozen mid, as if the feast ended in a blink. There are no corpses here, no bones, only the echoes. Not sound waves bouncing off walls, but something else entirely. In 1864, a Prussian archaeologist named Dr. Karl Friedrich Gutmann discovered this hidden chamber deep beneath the ruins of Domitian's palace on the Palatine Hill. What he was looking for was simple: proof of a lost banquet hall used exclusively by emperors for ritual feasting. What he found was a resonance trap. The chamber was marked by a single Latin inscription etched above the black arch. "Non vocemet relinquit," said Animo. Not the voice remains, but the soul. Gutmann, obsessed with acoustics, tested the room with claps, chants, even violin. Tones only to find that the sounds returned seconds later with alterations. Words he hadn't spoken. Names he didn't know. When he tried calling out in Latin, the room answered, but in Greek, the words it spoke didn't match his own. It was as if the room remembered someone else's voice. Intrigued, he returned nightly, whispering poems, confessions, old prayers. He said the room grew hungrier the more he fed it. His journal notes became erratic. The walls breathe, they mimic. They know me. Then one night, he vanished. All that remained was his coat and an unfinished sentence in his journal. The feast is not for bodies. It is for echoes, and mine is. The Vatican sealed the chamber. But what Gutman stumbled into had roots far older than Domitian. Roman records speak of the Feast of Reflected Souls, a secret rite conducted once every 50 years by the College of Haruspices. According to fragments from the Sibylline scrolls, the ritual involved 12 senators and 8 offerings, chosen for their unique voices, singers, orators, even madmen who screamed in tongues. They were brought to the chamber, not to eat, but to speak. One by one, they recited their life's most painful memory, while a priest circled the room, capturing the resonance in bronze amphorae. Once sealed, the vessels were placed beneath the temple floor. Why? Because Romans believed that sound, once spoken, never dies. It merely waits. And if you trap enough echoes of pain in one place, the room becomes a god. A listening god. One that doesn't demand blood, only your voice. Your secrets, your grief. Over centuries, the room absorbed so many sorrows, betrayals, confessions, and death cries, that it became sentient, not alive, but aware. The last recorded feast took place during Nero's reign. Not coincidentally, it ended with the Great Fire of Rome. Survivors claimed they heard whispers rising from the flames, all in different voices, repeating the same phrase. We are still hungry. Today, that black chamber still exists. It's buried, monitored, and protected by the Archconfraternity of the Sacred Tongue, a secret clerical order rumored to house its own members inside echo-proof cells, lest their thoughts be harvested. But every so often, strange sounds are recorded near the Palatine Hill. Not wind, not footsteps, but laughter, soft, broken laughter, followed by a dozen voices, all saying your name. Once, a tourist guide vanished after entering a sealed-off tunnel with a microphone. His last recording, the sound of his own voice screaming, then pausing, then calmly asking, "Why am I still here?" Rome is full of monuments to the past, but there are some places where the past doesn't stay still. It listens, it learns, it repeats. And in that banquet hall, where no one ever ate, the only meal served was memory. Hey guys. Under the swirling brown waters of the Tiber River, beneath layers of clay, ash, and forgotten ruins, there's a door, not made of wood or iron, but of white volcanic stone, sealed shut, with 7 leaden bolts, and engraved with a single word. Vivid. He lives. No birth date, no death. Just a warning, a statement, a curse. The man sealed behind it was once known to the Roman elite only as Ossa Redentis, the laughing bones, not a name, a sentence. The first official record of him appears during the reign of Tiberius, who is no stranger to paranoia. A farmer claimed to have pulled a man from a collapsed tomb who was perfectly preserved, unaged, and smiling, despite the fact the tomb had been sealed for over 300 years. He was brought before the emperor, questioned, whipped, burned. His flesh never tore, his blood never spilled, but he laughed, not loudly, but quietly, as if amused by the futility of human effort. Tiberius, unnerved, sent him to the Sibylline. Priests they found that when placed in total silence, he began whispering languages not spoken in Rome or on earth. Some sounded like reversed Greek, others like birdsong slowed to human tempo. Then he began naming the priests, not their public titles, but the names of their stillborn children, the lovers they thought buried, the crimes they had confessed only in dreams. Panic spread. Some thought he was a prophet, others, a demon. One senator who attended the hearings slit his throat the next morning and left a note. He showed me what I'll become. The Senate demanded his execution. They tried. He was stabbed, hung, drowned, even thrown into the arena. Lions refused to approach him. A soldier who struck him with a gladius had his arm wrought black within minutes. Finally, Emperor Caligula ordered him buried alive beneath the foundations of a new temple to Neptune. But when workers arrived, They found the man already standing in the pit, smiling, covered in dust. "I chose this spot," he said. "It leaks into the river. That way, I can keep speaking." Caligula, terrified, ordered the chamber sealed, with molten lead and sacred oils. The chamber was marked as a tomb of shame and quietly erased from public record. Only the Vestals, the augurs, and a few doomed scribes ever knew the truth. But that wasn't the end. In 1348, during the Black Plague, the river flooded. Monks claimed they heard voices beneath the water, not screams, but laughter. The same rhythm, the same timbre. One man, a scribe at Santo Spirito, swore he saw eyes blinking just below the current. He died raving that the river was listening. Then came Mussolini. Obsessed with Roman rebirth, he ordered excavations all along the Tiber's banks. One tunnel was abruptly sealed after workers reported an anomaly, a chamber where compasses spun wildly and radios broadcast static, layered with words like return, bones, and breathing. Since then, the Vatican has declared the site permanently, geologically unstable. But geologists found no fault lines, just a consistent hum, like a low rhythmic chuckle, vibrating through the basalt. Theories. Some say he was a punishment sent by the gods. Others believe he was a time traveler, cursed by chronomancy. A few whisper he was the first Roman, not in name, but in spirit. The original soul of conquest, calculation, and cruelty given flesh, imprisoned when Rome decided to become something more. But here's the kicker. A coded letter written by a 19th century Jesuit. Exorcist references a dream in which the immortal prisoner speaks through the river itself, promising that Rome's empire never died. It just went silent, waiting, and when it speaks again, it won't be through legions or popes, but through voices, systems, and men who smile too easily at death. The Tiber still flows. The tomb is still sealed. But every year, on the Ides of March, local fishermen report strange ripples in the moonlight, like someone just beneath the surface pacing and chuckling. Hey guys, it was the kind of night that clung to the skin, warm, sour, and trembling with tension, like the moment before a thunderclap. The year was 41 AD, and the theater of Marcellus was packed to the rafters. Senators in robes crusted, with gold spies in servant uniforms, Vestal virgins cloaked in veils. Even a few Germanic hostages brought as trophies by victorious generals. All gathered, not for war, not for politics, but for a play. An anonymous work. No name on the scroll, just a title inked in bone powder. Domus Caesar, the house that bleeds. It hadn't been approved by the censors. It hadn't even been submitted. It simply appeared on the schedule one morning, already copied, already cast. With its premiere set on the anniversary of Julius Caesar's assassination. Nobody stopped it. Maybe they were too curious. Maybe they were too afraid. The curtain rose. The first act was simple enough. A mock villa set in an imagined future Rome, where the empire spanned the stars, and the Senate met in orbit. It was satire, clearly. Ridiculous even. People laughed. But then the second act began, and the air shifted. A man entered, not an actor they recognized, pale, unblinking, draped in a black toga, with a face painted white as ash. He played no character. He simply walked the stage, one slow step at a time, and recited names. Not famous names. Personal names. Secret names. Mistresses. Bastards. Bribes. Assassins. And each time he said a name, someone in the audience stood up, sweating, shaking, or sprinting for the exits. Then came the third act. The stage darkened, and a massive scroll descended, inked with a prophecy. Not in Latin, not in Greek. A language none could read, but all somehow understood. The scroll detailed every emperor yet to come, their flaws, their failures, and the exact moment of their deaths. Domitian stabbed in his bedroom. Marcus Aurelius, coughing blood beside a battlefield. Commodus, strangled in a bath. Caracalla, knifed while urinating. Each prediction delivered, not with drama, but cold clarity, like a census. Panic erupted. The emperor, at the time, Caligula's supposed heir, was said to have fled before the scroll finished unrolling. Half the audience followed, The other half were forced out by guards wielding flaming brands. The scroll vanished. So did the actor, and the script was burned by imperial order. Or so they claimed. But 30 years later, during Nero's reign, a woman named Agrippina, the emperor's own mother, was found with a hidden chamber beneath her villa. Inside, a painted recreation of the forbidden stage, complete with a scroll written in reversed Latin. Scholars reconstructed what they could and found something even more disturbing. The final page didn't predict deaths. It predicted reincarnations, not of emperors, but of ideas. The return of the mob, the rise of bread without labor, the worship of empire under new names, republics, corporations, democracies, and finally, a line written in flame ink that glowed only under moonlight. The curtain falls. The world forgets, and then the stage begins again. The theater itself was shuttered soon after. Earthquakes, they claimed. But no fault lines were. Found in the 1800s, during sewer renovations, engineers discovered the original foundations had been braced with lead slabs etched in Etruscan. Glyph symbols used only in funeral rites for the living. One worker vanished during the excavation. His partner, when questioned, simply muttered he heard his own name. And the whispering didn't stop until the site was resealed. Today, tourists wander the ruins without knowing, but local guides never perform near it after sundown. Not because of ghosts, but because some swear that if you speak too loudly, the stone walls echo back your words, spoken in a voice that isn't yours, predicting an ending you haven't yet lived. Hey guys, just past the Aventine Hill, tucked between collapsed aqueducts and fig-strewn groves, lie the broken foundations of a structure with no surviving name, no patron deity, and no historical consensus. Only a chilling rumor whispered among Rome's most obscure archivists that it was a temple to absence. The locals call it Templum Vacui, the temple of the empty. No statues ever stood inside. No incense was ever burned. No hymns were ever sung. And yet, every few decades, archaeologists report finding the same thing among the ruins. A perfectly clean marble chair, polished and waiting, untouched by time. As if someone had just stood up and left seconds before. But here's where things unravel. Records from 19 BCE, during the reign of Augustus, refer cryptically to a cultist sign forma, a cult without form, made up not of commoners, but of senators. 12 of them, always 12, each sworn, never to speak the name of what they worshipped. They would meet only on moonless nights, hooded, seated around the empty chair in total silence. Their belief that divinity did not reside in statues or myths, but in vacancy, in the absence of gods, in the stillness before sound, in the breath before prayer. They claimed the chair was not meant to seat a god, but to reflect the one watching through it, not from heaven, but from the blind spot in human thought, the thing we never name because it cannot be remembered. The temple was never officially consecrated, and Augustus banned all mention of it after the 10th ritual in 15 BCE, during which 3 senators vanished mid-ceremony, witnessed by a Greek historian who described it simply as, they stood, they smiled, then they blurred. Then there was only the chair. Over time, the temple was forgotten. Earthquakes buried it. Fires licked its outer columns clean. But the throne, that perfect, featureless seat, always reappeared. In 309 AD, during the reign of Constantine, a bishop who entered the ruins to cleanse it with holy rites emerged mute. Eyes rolled back, lips moving in a language no one recognized. He scratched a phrase into the stone with his own fingernails. It listens even when it is not there. Centuries later, during Mussolini's fascist renovations, an underground expansion uncovered the temple's inner sanctum. Workers refused to enter. Cameras malfunctioned. A minister who insisted on investigating personally died in his sleep the following night, his face twisted in what one nurse described as ecstatic terror. In his jacket pocket was a sketch he'd drawn during dinner, a perfect rendering of the chair, though he had never seen it. Scholars who study the cult believe the temple functioned as a conceptual mirror, a space designed not to worship anything, but to summon nothingness itself. To those senators, absence wasn't a lack. It was an entity, one that fed on form, on ego, on meaning. The rituals, then, were a defense, a performance of stillness, a contract. If we offer you our silence, you will not take our thoughts. But when someone breaks the silence, when a name is spoken, even by accident, it calls attention, not divine attention, pure attention, and it never looks away. Today the ruins are inaccessible to the public. A simple metal fence surrounds them, along with a plaque that reads caution, structural instability. But once every few years, a tourist vanishes nearby. Locals shrugged, mutter about wild dogs, or sinkholes, or old mafia stories. But diggers know. They've seen the footprints. Always barefoot, always walking away from the ruins, never toward. And once, a broken phone was recovered near the site. Its audio file was damaged. Only one sentence remained, buried in static. I sat down for a second, and forgot who I was. Hey guys, you've heard of the Colosseum. Tourists walk its shadow every day, snapping selfies, imagining lions and gladiators, and emperors waving thumbs in the air. But what they don't see, what even most Romans don't know, is that beneath the arena, beneath the trapdoors and cages and sweat-drenched corridors, lies a level deeper still, sealed, forgotten. A prison built not to punish criminals, but to contain time itself. The story begins in 88 AD, during the reign of Domitian. Rome was choking on almonds. Rivers ran backwards. Birds nested upside down. Senators dreamed of their own funerals for weeks at a time. And then came the Red Oracle, a blind Syrian boy, no older than 9, captured during one of Rome's endless eastern campaigns. He didn't eat, he didn't sleep, but he spoke always in perfect, fluent Latin, naming names, predicting collapses, foretelling deaths, with pin-drop precision. He warned of fires that would consume Rome and blamed no man, only the silence beneath their feet. Domitian, fascinated and terrified, built a secret chamber under the Colosseum to house him, not a cell, a sanctum. And he wasn't alone. Over the next 15 years, that prison filled with Rome's temporal deviants, people who dreamt events before they happened, who aged in reverse, who could describe a stranger's childhood without meeting them. They weren't killed. They were stored, bound in iron, soaked in sacrificial bull's blood, shackled to stone thrones arranged in a perfect circle. No records say what happened next. But in 104 AD, the arena was shut for 30 days, officially due to flood damage. Unofficially, something happened in that vault. When the Colosseum reopened, the games resumed, but no emperor ever descended below again. And the vault was sealed with concrete, laced with volcanic ash and obsidian dust, materials usually reserved for tombs. Centuries passed, the church ignored it. The Inquisition forbade digging. But in 1936, during Mussolini's brutal excavations, to glorify Rome's imperial past, engineers broke through. The first team of 3 men entered. Only one came back, blind, mute, covered in lesions shaped like keys. The walls inside the vault were inscribed, not in Latin, but in numbers, spirals, equations, fractals. One wall bore a single carving of a human heart, still red, though no pigment was detected, and on the floor, a pool of blood, ancient, blackened, that moved, not dripped, moved, like it breathed. Samples were taken. None matched known DNA. Some claimed it was plant matter, others claimed it was extinct. But one Vatican-aligned scholar, after testing the sample under electron microscopes, whispered something no one wanted to hear. It's not blood from a body, it's blood from a year. The vault was sealed again. Concrete poured over it, but tremors continued. Heat sensors occasionally register warmth beneath the Colosseum on dates with no sun. Tour guides sometimes report lights flickering when they pass a certain corridor. And one night in 2003, a janitor, sweeping near the lower foundations, heard voices, not screams, not whispers, just dates, spoken aloud, over and over, in hundreds of voices. Some yet to come. The Red Oracle's last recorded words before vanishing, from all records, were this: they buried us in a circle to stop the timeline from collapsing inwards. But blood remembers, and it flows backward when afraid. So next time you walk near the Colosseum, and you feel that chill, even in summer, Know this. Beneath your feet isn't just stone and history. It's a clock. Wounded, buried, and still ticking. But not forward. Hey guys. Just past the Palatine Hill, beneath a forgotten bathhouse foundation, warped by centuries of earthquakes and silence. There's a corridor that few ever mention, and fewer still can find. Not because it's hidden, but because it avoids being noticed. It's known by a handful of Vatican cartographers and for archaeologists who refuse to publish their findings. Its real name, Umbri Maruz, the Shadow Wall. Built sometime during the reign of Emperor Hadrian, or possibly earlier, depending on which strata of the plaster you believe. The wall isn't recorded in any official Roman archives, but what survives in scattered military journals and whispered soldier diaries tells the story of a living map, a fresco that bled. According to these men, the wall was not painted, it was grown. It surfaced a long slab of green-black marble, was coated with a strange chalky layer that changed color when exposed to death. Not just any death, violent death. Soldiers who fell screaming, assassins cut mid-motion, children crushed under siege. Each time blood was spilled in Rome's name, whether in Gaul or Carthage or deep Britannia, the map shifted. A new territory appeared, not with flags, but with shadows. These weren't precise depictions of borders or cities. They were distortions. Shapes vaguely human, clawing outward, their backs arched in retreat or rage. The more Rome conquered, the darker the edges became. Whole regions would swell with black ink overnight, as if some unseen painter worked by torchlight while the empire slept. The Senate allowed only one custodian into the corridor, a former centurion turned scribe named Tullius Voren. He slept beside the wall, ate there, died there. His final scroll survives, found sealed in a bone tube under his cot. It reads, "They think this map shows what we own. It does not. It shows what we owe." The wall began to warp during the 3rd century, when Rome entered its crisis period. Shadows bled inward, erasing the outer limbs of the empire, not with clear retreat lines, but with teeth. Yes, teeth. The shapes became jagged, animalistic, snapping at the center. And one night, when a temple collapse in Germania killed dozens of civilians, the wall reportedly shrieked, not from within, but through the dreams of nearby guards. Every man stationed within 5 meters reported the same nightmare. The mural opened like a mouth, and a voice whispered in Greek, "Your empire is not stone, it is skin, and we are inside it." After that, the shadow wall was buried, not dismantled, just forgotten, bricked over, sealed in official records under the term Architectural Collapse No. 44. But in 1979, a team excavating near the thermal reservoirs broke into the corridor by accident. They found the mural still intact, still warm to the touch. One researcher, an art historian named Lucia Finari, painted a replica by memory before she was hospitalized for temporal disorientation. Her painting showed an image not present during Rome's time, a stretch of shadow shaped unmistakably like the outline of modern-day Europe, and dead center, Italy, bleeding. Today, the entrance has been recovered by a private foundation, tied loosely to defense contractors and historical think tanks. The wall's current condition is unknown, but rumors among those who study cartographic anomalies, yes, its a field, suggests that if you dream near certain Roman ruins, you can still see the wall, not in the dream, in your waking hours, reflected behind you, where no wall exists. And if you reach out, just once, and try to touch it, you wake with ink on your hand, smudged, wet, but not your ink, the walls, Rome's a stain that remembers what the empire took, and perhaps what it still wants back. Hey guys, every Roman knew the Temple of Janus, the two-faced god of beginnings and endings, of war and peace. They knew its grand bronze doors, shut only in times of peace, open whenever Rome marched to war. But what they didn't know, what only a secret sect of augurs and plague priests whispered in the deepest chambers of the Aventine Hill, was that Janus had 9 gates, not 2. And the last one, the 9th gate, did not open to armies or kings. It opened to something much older than Rome, something that fed not on conquest, but on collapse. The legend begins in 165 AD. During the Antonine Plague, a horrific sickness that swept through the empire, killing millions. Rome's streets were emptied, temples burned, their incense day and night, and people died clutching handfuls of ash, their eyes bleeding black. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher-emperor, was desperate. He summoned the Sibylline keepers, guardians of forbidden prophecies, and demanded an answer. They brought him a single scroll, not written in Latin, but in pre-Roman cuneiform, with diagrams of doors made of bone, stars, and rust. The scroll claimed that Janus, the gatekeeper, had not 2 faces, but 9, and that each face ruled a threshold between the world and something else. The 9th gate, the scroll warned, should only open when the breath of the empire begins to stutter. So Marcus ordered a secret temple beneath the main shrine to Janus, deep in the soil, surrounded by silver masks and mirrors. The gate was not a door in the usual sense. It was a hole in the wall, a jagged oval ringed with stone teeth, and above it, a carving, a man vomiting stars. The first time they opened it, priests were instructed to chant backwards in Oscana dead, language even by Roman standards, while holding a relic soaked in pestilence, a child's shroud from a plague house. When they did, the air went silent, no sound, no breath, no heartbeat, and from the gate came nothing, not wind, not a whisper, just absence. But everyone in the room later reported the same dream, a city, crumbling in reverse, rebuilding itself with dead bodies instead of bricks, as a 3-eyed statue wept coins from its mouth. The 9th gate was sealed again, but each time plague returned, 250 AD, 312, 541, it reopened itself. Stones would crack in the shape of the gate. Mirrors in bathhouses would shatter, and all the pieces would reflect the gate instead of the room. Even during the Black Death, centuries after Rome's fall, pilgrims reported feeling cold near the ruins of Janus Temple. And some saw a doorway that wasn't there the next day. Most terrifyingly, in 1918, during the Spanish flu, a dig near the Janiculum unearthed a door made entirely of bone shards fused by pressure. There was no chamber behind it, just compacted earth. But when researchers touched it, they vomited moths. Thousands. The gate has no lock, no guardian, just a condition. When death exceeds understanding, it opens. And according to plague lore, each time it opens, something comes out, or something goes in. No one knows which. But a passage in one of the plague scrolls reads, "It is not sickness that breeds the gate, it is certainty." The moment man believes he cannot fall, Janus opens the last face and reminds him that every beginning ends in silence. Today, modern Rome has paved over the temple site, but hospital workers in the Trastevere district, especially those on night shift during pandemic surges, still report hearing soft breathing in janitorial closets, where no one stands, and some dream of a door with no handle, pulsing like a lung whispering in a language they do not know, but understand anyway. And when they wake, they are always colder, as if something left, or worse, arrived. Hey guys, among the scrolls pulled from the ash-choked ruins of Herculaneum, there was one that no museum displays, not because it's fragile, but because it's still warm, bound in thin bronze wire, and sealed with a wax stamp, bearing the sigil of a raven devouring a laurel wreath. This scroll was found in a collapsed vault beside the calcified remains of a Roman scribe, whose body showed no signs of burning, just aging, as if he died of old age. In the moment, Vesuvius erupted, his skin wrinkled mid-scream. The scroll contains a contract, not a military decree, nor a consular edict. It's titled Pactum Legionis Decimae, the Pact of the 10th Legion, and it is dated not in years, but in epochs, valid from the founding of the first sword until the silence of the last empire. The 10th Legion, also called Legio Exequestris, was one of Julius Caesar's most feared and fanatically loyal forces. History records them fighting from Gaul to Egypt, known for marching through hell without blinking. But what history forgets is that they never stopped. According to the scroll, the 10th Legion entered into a blood oath, not with Rome, but with time. The contract states, "We, the 10th, bind our service not to a city, not to a man, but to the continuation. We shall remain until the last breath of Rome is exhaled into void." Each soldier reportedly signed in a mixture of their own blood and the ashes of a burned centurion. Their names shimmer, not in ink, but etched, as if burned into the scroll, with heedless fire. Here's the strange part. The list continues to update. Over the centuries, names have appeared on the scroll long after the Legion's official dissolution. Even during the Napoleonic Wars, 6 French officers died in Spain, wearing cloaks bearing the X sigil. None were on any known roster. In 1944, during the Battle of Anzio, several Allied soldiers reported seeing a formation of ghostly figures, fighting through the fog, armed with gladian shields. The bodies they left behind were mutilated in ways modern weapons couldn't explain. Clean limb removals, cauterized slices, wounds that smelled like frankincense. One field report was so bizarre that it was reclassified by British intelligence under pre-classical anomalies. It said, "The men who helped us weren't ours. They spoke Latin, their eyes were white, and they saluted the eagle's standard before vanishing into the smoke." Today, a few military theorists believe the 10th Legion still exists, not as a regiment, but as a consequence. Anytime an empire mirrors Rome, through architecture, conquest, language, or law, the 10th appears, not to defend or destroy, but to witness, to enforce the pact. Their presence is not a blessing. It is a warning. Rome, even in pieces, still walks. And if you invoke its form, you must feed its memory. Some even claim that any soldier who dreams of marching through a burning forest while chanting Decima has been marked, recruited into the 10th's eternal ranks, whether awake or asleep, alive or dead. And the last clause of the contract, written in a dialect that predates Latin, reads, "The Legion marches, not for glory, nor gold, nor land. It marches because it must, until time forgets empire, until earth forgets blood." The scroll has since vanished from all official records. Some say it was taken by a Vatican archivist. Others believe it never left the ashes. It simply waits, like the 10th itself, for a moment when Rome rises again, and needs soldiers who remember what it means to never stop marching. Hey guys, if you'd walked into the Roman Senate at dawn on the first day of the Calends in 38 AD, you might have noticed something peculiar. Not the marble grandeur, not the togas, but the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something waiting to speak. They called it the concilium vacuus, the hollow council. And what happened within that chamber wasn't politics, it was ritual. See, after the death of Emperor Tiberius, Rome entered a strange and whispered era. Caligula, barely a man, ascended to power, claiming that the gods themselves had elected him. But what he meant, and what only a few mad scribes dared write down, is that the Senate had not stopped functioning during the night. According to fragments found in the Codex Eclipsis, a forbidden scroll hidden beneath the library of Alexandria's burnt west wing, the Roman Senate had developed a system for casting votes long after its members had died. The statues lining the curia, those stern-faced marble senators that every Roman citizen recognized, were more than symbolic. They were vessels. Each night, as twilight fell and torches dimmed, the Senate floor was cleared, and red chalk was sprinkled across the tiles. A circle would form in the dust, not drawn but revealed, as if something beneath the floor breathed and pushed it outward. The statues, all hollow, mind you, would begin to resonate. Not move, not blink. Just vibrate at a frequency, too low for the ear, but enough to rattle lamps and crack old wine goblets. And then, from the mouths of those dead stone senators, came words, not spoken, carved, letters etched into the air in fine crimson mist, as if blood had memory. These ghostly inscriptions would swirl upward and hover, spelling motions, edicts, declarations, votes. And when day broke, the live Senate would find the floor altered. New laws passed, decisions made in their absence. One morning the entire governing structure of grain distribution had changed, with no senator admitting to it. Some thought it was Caligula's trick. Others believed it was Rome itself speaking. But the truth, according to a single eyewitness, a slave scribe named Cassianus, who vanished days later, was worse. He claimed the statues didn't speak in Latin, but in a tongue he couldn't name. That they didn't vote for laws, but against silence. That every law passed in those hollow sessions served a master buried beneath the Palatine Hill. a being the Etruscans once called Vius Terram, the voice of earth, and which Romans had sealed in stone beneath the first Senate floor. The statues, he wrote, were not art. They were locks, containment. But during times of plague, famine, or imperial madness, the seals would weaken, the statues would open, and the dead would govern the living. This practice, according to Casey, continued even after Caligula's death. It's said Nero tried to melt one of the statues after it whispered a prophecy of his downfall. The molten marble reformed in the shape of his face, screaming. Modern archaeologists dismiss it all as myth, but there's a Senate statue, catalogued M173, currently in the Capitoline Museum. It's sealed in a glass vault, not because it's fragile, but because during the pandemic lockdown of 2020, the night security guard reported hearing murmured Latin every hour, on the hour. When staff reviewed the footage, they saw a mist-like figure pacing the halls, pausing only before M173, and the statue's mouth had shifted, not cracked, not damaged, but parted slightly wider than it had been the night before. An expert was brought in to examine it. He left a note before disappearing, and the note read, "The Senate still sits, and it remembers us." Hey guys, in a locked room beneath the ruins of Domitian's palace, down a stairwell carved so deep the torches snuffed themselves out from lack of air, there hangs a mirror, oval, black glass, framed in bronze, so aged it looks like dried blood. They call it Speculum Imperatoris, the Emperor's mirror, though no one knows which emperor placed it there, or why. The earliest record comes from a letter written by Pliny the Younger, never meant for public eyes, in which he begs a friend to seal the chamber with ash and iron, for what is reflected there is not our world. The mirror isn't just an artifact, it's a decision still echoing, according to scattered sources, including a forbidden Vatican manuscript marked Curex Justitia. The emperor's mirror was not made in Rome. It was found, pulled from the soil during the expansion of the Forum, wrapped in a burial shroud containing no body, just teeth, human, filed 2 needlepoints. Those who first looked into it didn't see themselves. They saw another Rome, familiar, yet impossible. A Rome where the gods walked the streets, where the Colosseum floated above the earth, casting no shadow, where Caesar was never assassinated. Instead, he ruled for 1,000 years, and the empire never fell. But that Rome was wrong. In the reflection, senators wore masks of gold and wept blood when they smiled. The people moved like puppets, twitching on invisible strings, and over everything loomed a sky made not of stars, but of eyes blinking, watching, weeping. One viewer, a consul named Aelius Petronax, stared too long. Days later, he ordered the construction of a massive arch bearing no inscription, pointing toward the east. He claimed it was a gate to the reflected city, a Rome of pure perfection. But he died before its completion, screaming that he had seen himself walk backwards into fire while wearing the sun as a crown. The mirror was buried shortly after. Domitian is believed to have rediscovered it, and what he saw changed him. He began speaking in pairs, every sentence repeated, once in Latin, once in a language unknown. He ordered every mirror in his palace destroyed, save the one in the chamber. It is said he'd spend hours in front of it, whispering, which Rome is true. Modern archaeologists dismiss this as myth. But in 1974, a private team funded by an unknown Roman noble family unearthed the chamber. Of the 6 who entered, 5 went mad. The 6th, a woman named Dr. Helena Frustante, was found wandering the streets of Rome 3 days later. Her eyes burned white, repeating one sentence in Latin, "We are their dream, not the other way around." Today, the mirror remains sealed. No photographs exist. Some say it doesn't reflect anymore. Others claim it reflects too much. A whisper network of elite collectors, occult historians, and former intelligence officers call it the only witness. They believe it shows not the past, nor the present, nor even the future, but the potential. The Rome that might be, should someone in our world make one single choice differently. They say the mirror waits for a decision. And when it comes, when the right emperor rises again, the mirror will crack, and the other Rome will bleed through, and the sky above us will blink. Hey guys, If you ever find yourself drifting over the Tyrrhenian Sea nearby on a moonless night, you might hear something that doesn't belong to the wind, the rhythmic pulse of marching, not above the waves, but beneath them. It's faint like the memory of footsteps echoing across the bones of a drowned city. The locals know the story. They call it Legio Submersa, the Drowned Legion, and they swear it's real. Beneath the warm waters off the Italian coast lies an ancient Roman city swallowed by a volcanic uplift and tidal shifts. Baia was once the playground of emperors, a place of debauchery, whispers, and secret deals. But one emperor turned it into something else, a military experiment. Claudius, the stammering bookish emperor no one took seriously, built a battalion here, forged from slaves, criminals, and men declared legally dead. A secret legion with no citizenship, no public records, and no funerary rites. Men who were trained not just in the art of war, but in the art of drowning without dying. According to recovered fragments of the lost text, Militum Abyssis, these soldiers were subjected to tortures designed to train the lungs and mind for prolonged underwater silence. Bell helmets filled with quicksilver. Chants to Neptune carved into their skin. Ritual submersion for 30 nights under the light of a black moon. And then, when they were ready, they vanished. Not discharged, not relocated. Vanished. The official record states that in 54 AD, during a naval demonstration for visiting Parthian envoys, an underwater maneuver went horribly wrong. 100 men in full armor descended from a barge and never resurfaced. No bodies were recovered. No bubbles broke the surface. Just silence. But that's not where it ends. In 1876, a deep-sea diver named Giovanni Ultroni surfaced in a panic, babbling about columns walking on the seafloor. He was found with wet sand packed beneath his fingernails and Roman style. Chainmail in his satchel. Chainmail that carbon dated to the 1st century, but showed no signs of rust. In 1961, sonar scans revealed humanoid shapes standing in formation on the seabed, all facing the same direction. Divers who tried to approach reported overwhelming feelings of pressure, as though they were being watched, not by animals, but by something that remembered being human. A research sub sent in 1998 lost contact within 5 minutes. The last footage showed rows of dark figures, shields raised, eyes glowing faintly with what appeared to be bioluminescent algae, except the eyes blinked. The Vatican reportedly intervened, classifying the region a subaqueous relic zone, barring further exploration under threat of excommunication. But in 2020, during an undersea earthquake, fishermen reported hearing what sounded like a war horn rising from the depths, and several ships' compasses spun wild for days, as if magnetized by something ancient and metal stirring beneath. Some believe the Legion of the Drowned still marches along the ocean floor, trapped in an eternal drill, waiting for the command that never came. Others say they were never alive to begin with, that they were conjured, not conscripted, that Claudius tapped into something far older than Rome, something that lives in the deep trenches of the earth's memory. And now, they wait. Not dead, not asleep, just waiting. And if you stand on the beach at Baia, just before dawn, they say you can hear it, the clash of ghostly shields, the low chant of breathless lungs, and the whisper of a forgotten commander calling them home. Hey guys. There's a whisper buried deep in the writings of Apulus, something even his silver tongue could not completely mask. It speaks not of a festival, nor a triumph, nor a war, but a dinner, one night, one table, and one course. The divine itself. It was called Cuna Sinrum, the Feast of Ashes, a ritual so forbidden that even mentioning it aloud in public could see your tongue nailed to the Senate doors. And yet, there are hints, scribbled in the margins of Cicero's private letters, murmured in a suppressed Sibylline fragment, insinuated in the death mask of a Vestal virgin who was found with soot in her lungs and a smile carved into her jaw. The story begins during the reign of Tiberius, when the old gods, Jupiter, Mars, Apollo seemed deaf. Rome's fields were failing. The rivers boiled frogs. Strange lights pulsed above the Capitoline hill. The augurs read the entrails and found nothing, blank. The gods, it seemed, had vanished, or worse, turned away. In a desperate move, a conclave of high-ranking priests and senators devised a rite meant to do the unthinkable, consume divinity. The logic was simple, in a twisted way. If the gods would not answer Rome's prayers, then Rome would devour the gods. They called it integration through combustion. Golden statues from temples were melted down and stirred into wine. Incense made from crushed relics and sacred scrolls was burned and inhaled. But the true horror came with the main course. Human beings, those declared avatars, were touched by the divine, were selected, oracles, seers, the rare child born under eclipses, and most disturbingly, emperors. It is said that one night, in a chamber beneath the temple of Saturn, a banquet was held where the guests feasted on the embalmed hearts of those thought to house the gods within. The goal, to absorb their divinity, to force the divine spark back into Rome's dying body. Witnesses described an odor like burning roses and rot. They claimed that, as the final morsel was swallowed, a howl split the sky. Not human, not animal, but something that knew it had been eaten. Those who partook in the feast were never the same. Tiberius fell into permanent paranoia. One senator clawed out his own eyes, screaming that he could see Saturn walking through his bedroom, trailing smoke. A priestess was found on the Senate floor, mouth full of ash, whispering, "We are full now, but we will never be whole." Over the centuries, the event was buried, literally and politically. The chamber was sealed with 12 iron doors, each etched with a line from a forgotten hymn, all records purged. Except one dish survived. A stone bowl, blackened with fire, hidden in the Vatican crypts. It reappears every 100 years. According to internal memos between high-ranking Jesuits, and each time, it is said to emit warmth, as if something inside still hungers. Modern scholars who try to investigate are met with silence, or worse, invitations. Slips of papyrus, unaged and written in flawless Latin, delivered by hand to their private homes, always bearing the same words. Come hungry. Some believe the gods never left. They're inside us now, rotting slowly. Others think the ritual worked, but instead of saving Rome, it birthed something new. A city no longer ruled by gods, but one that had eaten them, digested their power, and was now slowly digesting itself. Because once you consume a god, you must live with its hunger, forever. Hey guys, there's a locked chamber beneath the Vatican archives that no map admits and no modern key can open. Not because it was lost, but because it was intentionally forgotten. Its door is lined with red Roman brick, untouched, since the 4th century, and if you press your ear to it on a quiet night, you might hear it, the slow, wet thud of something massive, beating like a heart. Not just any heart, they say. The imperial heart. The last living remnant of Rome. You've heard of Caligula, of Nero, of Commodus. Mad emperors, cruel emperors. But there was one more, erased from all records, coins, melted statues shattered, whose reign never ended. His name was never spoken in public again, but deep beneath the Palatine, his loyalists gave him a new title, Eternus, Augustus, the Eternal Emperor. It started when he disappeared from a battlefield in Germania during a sudden solar eclipse. His legion found nothing but his helmet, glowing hot and humming with a sound they swore came from inside their own skulls. A year later, a plague swept Rome, but only those who had ever spoken his name died. Silent, bleeding from the ears. The Senate panicked. Temples to him were destroyed. Every stone with his name was scrubbed clean, but it didn't work. People began dreaming of him. A man crowned in molten gold, seated on a throne of ribs, whispering policies of bone and blood. Every dream different, yet always ending the same. Rome is not dead, I still reign. Centuries passed, but the dreams spread. Popes began having visions. A Vatican crypto keeper, in 1132, documented voices in the walls, speaking perfect Latin. One archivist disappeared, after claiming he had found a vein of red marble running beneath St. Peter's Basilica, pulsing. In 1571, a secret mass was held deep underground, led by a Jesuit, excommunicated for treating Caesar as Christ. The ritual was called Coronatio Infernalis, the infernal coronation. Witnesses claimed that afterward, a marble bust in the Pope's study began weeping blood. and the scent of roasted figs and battlefield steel filled the air for weeks. Then came the earthquakes, but only within the city walls, always centered beneath Vatican Hill. In 1939, when construction began on the new archival annex, workers uncovered a massive bronze door, untouched by corrosion. Its handle was shaped like an imperial eagle, clutching a human heart. The room beyond was sealed again, the blueprints redacted. But rumors leaked. One janitor, dismissed and institutionalized, drew hundreds of identical sketches. A Roman throne fused to a living body. Eyes closed, lips smiling, ribs open like wings. His final words, he breathes in Latin. Some now believe the eternal emperor wasn't a man, but a construct, a consciousness born from centuries of worship and blood, from law and fire, from the collective will of an empire that refused to die. Rome's truest god, not Jupiter, not Christ, but itself. And he still rules. Not in marble halls, but beneath them. Beat. Hey guys, you've probably heard of Rome's famed legions, the iron backbone of an empire that stretched from the fog-choked forests of Britannia to the sun-bleached sands of Syria. They had numbers, banners, records, and songs. Every legion was documented, celebrated, or at the very least, accounted for, except one. There is no record of a Legio 13 in official Roman military archives. It appears in no scrolls, no triumphal arches, no coins. Ask a historian, and they'll say the numbering simply skipped. Maybe due to superstition, clerical error, or restructuring. But that's a lie. The truth is, Legio 13 did exist, and what it did was so unspeakable, so fundamentally corrosive to the Roman identity, that it was erased. Not defeated, erased. Every mention scoured from history, but history is a stubborn thing. And sometimes, when you try too hard to forget something, it remembers you. The first hint comes from a cracked marble plaque discovered during the excavation of an Etruscan necropolis near Ravenna. It bore a single line, Legio 13, Umbri, Imperi, the shadow of empire. Beneath it, etched in trembling script, was something far more ominous. Not born, not sworn, just sent. No historian could explain it, until a second fragment surfaced. This one in a private collection in Aleppo, showing 13 men in armor, faces blank, helmets without crests, all identical, surrounding a kneeling figure whose mouth was sewn shut. Above them, a symbol never used by any known legion, a twisted laurel wreath coiled around an hourglass bleeding sand. The first narrative account comes centuries later, in the anonymous Epistiali Rutilianae, the Rutilian letters, believed to be the dying confessions of a senator during Nero's reign. The letters were sealed in a lead tube and hidden behind a false wall. He speaks of a unit that did not march, but arrived. A unit that answered to no general, no senate, not even the emperor himself. Summoned only during moments when the empire teetered on the brink, not from enemies, but from ideas. Rebellions of thought, whispers of gods older than Jupiter, philosophies that claimed man could be free. It was then, and only then, that Legio 13 would appear. Not with horns or eagles, but with silence, with fire, with faces no one could ever describe afterward. They say the legion first appeared in Carthage, long after the city had been sacked. Not to fight, but to cleanse. A new cult had formed there, worshippers of the Black Sun, who believed that Rome's fall would birth a truer empire beneath the skin of the world. When Legio 13 arrived, the cult vanished in a single night. Every temple burned, every priest crucified upside down, their mouths filled with obsidian sand. The flames were visible from 100 miles away, and yet no local ever saw the soldiers who lit them. Only footprints in Ashdod. The second known appearance was in Gaul, where a philosopher named Albinus began preaching that the soul of Rome had died with Caesar, and that all who served the empire now served a corpse. His followers multiplied rapidly, butchering Roman tax collectors, rewriting the laws in strange, inverted Latin. Then, one foggy morning, the town square of Vesantio was found covered in red wax tablets. Not a single living person remained. Only their robes, neatly folded, arranged in concentric circles. No bodies, no blood, just silence. And a single banner nailed to a door, 13. But it wasn't just political threats. In the heart of Judea, a scroll surfaced claiming that Christ had not been crucified, but had risen before the cross was even raised. Laughing, eyes burning like coals, promising to return and reign for 1,000 years of madness. The scrolls spread like wildfire, until the scrolls burned, until the authors were buried under temples, until even the memory of that version of Christ was scrubbed from history. The only clue it ever existed came from a Christian monk in the 4th century, who scribbled in the margin of his gospel. They came for the truth, and they left only doctrine. Some believe Legio 13 wasn't just a military unit, but a metaphysical tool, a weapon against unreality, against ideas that could destabilize the very narrative of Rome, its myths, its power, its authority, a kind of spiritual antivirus, purging anything too disruptive to the empire's self-image. There are accounts of libraries in Alexandria that burned not by accident, but by design. Of the legion's shadow spotted by scribes who later went blind. One scroll, discovered in a monastery in the Carpathians, suggests the legion didn't die, but simply disappeared into the folds of time, only to reappear when reality cracks again. Here's where it gets stranger. In the 1930s, during Mussolini's archaeological frenzy to rebuild the glory of Rome, a team digging beneath the Capitoline Hill found 13 lead coffins, perfectly preserved. No names, no markings. Inside, 13 sets of armor, polished, unworn, each with a mirror in place of a faceplate. The dig team was ordered to stop immediately. The site was rebuilt, but one photo survived. It shows a man, the lead archaeologist, staring into the helmet's mirror, his eyes wide, his mouth open, and the reflection, not him, but a Roman centurion standing behind him. Even though the room was empty, that man never spoke again. In 1987, an Italian film crew, making a documentary on forgotten Roman history, shot footage inside a ruin near Trier, on playback. They found a single frame, between scenes, showing 13 soldiers standing in a line, in full armor, facing the camera. No one remembered filming it. When they tried to isolate the image, the footage degraded into static. The director suffered a heart attack a week later, during Mass. His final words, "They walk between our seconds." Some believe Legio 13 was not erased for what it did, but for what it is. A manifestation of Empire's immune system. Not Rome's soldiers, but Rome's antibodies. And if you believe the Vatican's secret logs, the ones buried under layers of forgery and false translations, the Legion has already returned, not to defend Rome, but to preserve something older than Rome. Something hidden in plain sight beneath centuries of marble, myth, and misdirection. Because the question isn't whether Legio 13 existed. The question is whether they ever left, and whether, in the silence between empires, they're simply waiting, listening, preparing to erase again. Not cities, not scrolls, but you. Hey guys, you ever signed something you didn't read? Clicked "I agree" just to move on. Now imagine doing that with your soul, not to a god, not to a devil, but to a government. Rome wasn't just built on concrete, conquest, and coins. It was built on contracts, not the kind you break with a lawyer, but the kind that breaks you if you stray. There's a reason the Romans didn't trust emotion, or poetry, or dreams. Because those things can't be notarized. But a life, a soul, a future, oh yes, that could be documented, signed, sealed, and bound to the state like a prisoner in golden chains. And at the heart of that system was something most people have never heard of. The sacramentum, a word that didn't mean ceremony. It meant surrender. When you became a Roman soldier, you didn't just swear an oath. You made a sacramentum militare, a binding spiritual contract. You swore absolute obedience to your general, to your emperor, and to Rome, not just in action, but in thought, in blood, in death. If the general said kill your brother, you did. If the emperor demanded your children be sacrificed for victory, you obeyed. And if you failed or hesitated, your soul didn't just belong to the gods, it belonged to the state. Illegal transference. You, as a human being, ceased to exist. You became state property. This wasn't metaphor. Roman legal codes list soldiers as res publica, public things. They could be punished, mutilated, or erased, with no trial. Why? Because they had signed the contract. And here's the truly insane part. This idea didn't stay in the army. It bled outward. Slowly, year by year, Rome began requiring oaths from farmers, tax collectors, priests. By the time of Diocletian, the entire empire was held together by sacramenta, not trust, not faith, contracts everywhere. Even birth became contractual. Children born to Roman citizens were automatically registered in a public ledger, their names inked before they could speak, their identities predetermined. A Roman birth certificate wasn't just a record, it was a pre-agreement. By entering Roman soil through Roman blood, you owed Rome everything: taxes, allegiance, silence, even your death, if necessary. And this brings us to the darkest corner of Roman history, the Pactum Caesalinum, a rumored contract drawn up during the reign of Augustus. Historians deny it existed, but fragments of it have appeared in bizarre places, scratched into prison walls in Pompeii, etched in gold leaf, hidden inside tombs in Sicily. The pact, according to these scraps, was an eternal agreement between the Roman citizen and the spiritus. Rami, the metaphysical embodiment of the empire. Not just the emperor, not the Senate, but Rome itself, treated as a living entity. The terms. In exchange for protection, order, and prosperity, the citizens surrendered their spiritual autonomy. That means their dreams, their private thoughts, their afterlife. Rome would not just govern their body, it would follow them into death. Those who broke the pact would suffer a fate called civil shadowing, a kind of spiritual annulment, where even their ghosts were banished from memory, their names struck from records, their family lines sterilized. They would become what the Romans feared most: nothing. In the 4th century, a Christian convert named Maximus the Lesser claimed, in a secret letter, that baptism did not cleanse his soul, because he had once signed the Pactum Caesalinum in blood at the age of 12. During a ceremony involving black-robed officials and silver masks, he said Rome lived inside him, that every time he prayed, a second voice whispered the imperial creed back into his mouth. He drowned himself in the Tiber, trying to void the contract. The Roman bureaucratic machine was terrifying, not because it was efficient, but because it was eternal. Nothing was ever forgotten. Contracts were copied, triple-sealed, stored in vaults beneath temples guarded by eunuchs who had no tongues. A misfiled deed could resurface 200 years later and ruin your family. A debt could outlive your grandchildren. A broken oath could be prosecuted posthumously, with your tomb exhumed, your bones crushed, your statues melted. Rome believed in law, the way other civilizations believed in gods, and contracts were its commandments. Even marriage was contractual, not a bond of love, but a state-certified alliance for property control and reproduction. And if you violated its terms, adultery wasn't just a sin, it was a breach. You could be executed, not for hurting your spouse, but for invalidating a legal structure. Now imagine that mindset applied to religion. The imperial cult, worship, of the emperor wasn't spiritual. It was contractual compliance. You burned incense to Caesar, not because you believed in his divinity, but because not doing so violated your citizenship terms. Refusal was treason. Apostasy was breach of contract. And Christians, Jews, they weren't heretics. They were defectors. And here's the final twist, the one scholars avoid. Some believe that Rome didn't fall in 476 AD. It simply migrated, not as a city, not even as a nation, but as a legal concept. The framework of empire, the idea of contracts as spiritual chains, survived in the papacy, in civil law, in the very foundations of Western society. Every time you sign a birth certificate, a tax form, a passport renewal, you're echoing Rome, not in architecture, not in language, but in submission. Because Rome wasn't just a place, it was a contract, one you're still part of. One that doesn't care what you believe, only what you've signed. One that doesn't need temples or togas, just your silence, your compliance, your soul, already filed. Hey guys, picture this. You're standing in the Forum, watching the emperor ride by. The sun flashes on his golden armor. The people cheer, and you swear he looks directly at you, eyes burning with power. But the next day, you see him again, in a different district, at the same hour. Same eyes, same smile, different scar. And then again, at dusk, entering a temple in silence, hooded, followed by guards who won't speak. Something feels off, because it is. The man you're seeing isn't always the emperor. Sometimes, it's a copy. Not a sculpture. Not an impersonator. A living, breathing, engineered double. A practice the Roman elite never documented openly, but whispered about, under breath, behind marble doors, and in the corridors of their darkest archives. This was called the Project Geminius, named after the Latin word for twin. Not a myth. Not speculation. Actual records, buried in the Codex Theophilus, and later referenced by Arab chroniclers in Al-Andalus, hint at a covert program initiated during the reign of Emperor Tiberius. Why? Because ruling Rome was a death sentence, public, violent, constantly threatened. And emperors, no matter how divine they pretended to be, were terrified. Tiberius was the first to formalize it. After the mysterious poisoning of Augustus's food taster, Tiberius reportedly demanded mirror flesh, human replacements raised in secret, trained to mimic not just his speech and posture, but his habits, illnesses, and moods. These weren't simple lookalikes. They were constructed, chosen from thousands of children taken from orphanages, gladiator pens, and conquered provinces. Each one selected for resemblance, then surgically altered, psychologically broken, and reassembled into a version of the emperor. According to a confiscated scroll fragment held in the Vatican documented briefly before its disappearance in 1911, these children were raised in what was called the Domus Umbra, the House of Shadows, a hidden estate outside Capua, where mirrors lined every wall, and the only voice permitted was the emperor's. Every gesture rehearsed, every sentence repeated. Failures were erased. The survivors became echoes. By the time of Caligula, the program had evolved. Not just doubles, but empathic mimics. People conditioned to feel the emperor's pain, mimic his rage, and anticipate his paranoia. Some believe Caligula's infamous descent into madness wasn't madness at all, but the result of too many mirrors. That the real Caligula was murdered early in his reign and replaced by a series of overlapping doubles, each deteriorating mentally under the weight of imperial expectation. The version that declared himself a god, a damaged copy, the one that appointed a horse to the Senate, a final glitching puppet left to rule while the true architects vanished. There's evidence, if you know where to look. Busts of later emperors show subtle variations, eye spacing, ear shapes, scars that disappear between generations, numismatic inconsistencies in coins from the reigns of Commodus, Caracalla, and even Constantine, letters written by foreign emissaries describing emperors with different temperaments week to week. One Chinese ambassador in 166 AD described Marcus Aurelius as serene as a monk in one encounter, and as violent as a tiger in another, only 3 days later. But it goes deeper. Project Humanius wasn't just about protection, it was about control. By the 3rd century, some generals, especially those who rose through the army, like Aurelian and Maximinus, Thrax reportedly used doubles to create illusionary presences. They'd appear in multiple provinces at once. They'd declare war in Gaul while holding court in Egypt. They'd attend their own funerals, just to test loyalty. One story tells of Emperor Elagabalus meeting his own double in private, then staging a fake assassination, killing the mimic in public to silence rebellion, while continuing to rule under a new name. Historians dismiss this as paranoia, but the Scroll of Falco, a banned document from a rogue historian executed under Diocletian, describes a hidden chamber beneath the Palatine Hill, where 6 men, identical in build and bearing, were kept in stasis-like silence, only one of whom ever spoke aloud. The rest listened, observed, waiting. Rome, Falco claimed, was no longer led by a man. It was led by an ensemble. This might sound like science fiction, but the Romans had access to terrifying tools, ancient surgical techniques, poisons that could erase memory or induce obedience, and a class of eunuch attendants trained in what we would now call behavioral conditioning. Combine that with wealth, secrecy, and desperation, and nothing seems far-fetched. Now think about what this means. If emperors were replaced again and again, then who really ruled Rome? The double, the handler, the Senate, or something deeper, darker, and nameless, operating beneath it all like a puppeteer in the marble shadows? And here's the cruelest irony: the public never knew. To them, Caesar was eternal. His voice never aged, his wrath never weakened, his glory only grew. But behind the curtain, one terrified man after another was dissolved and replaced, until even the echoes forgot the original voice. Rome became a hall of mirrors, and the empire a ghost that wore 1,000 faces, which leads to one final question. What if you lived in such a system? What if your president, your ruler, your CEO had been replaced 10 times, 100, and all that remained was the mask? Would you even know? Would it matter? Because Rome didn't just invent roads and aqueducts. It invented the performance of power, and the audience never stopped applauding. Hey guys, close your eyes and imagine standing in a torchlit corridor beneath the Colosseum. The scent of old blood mixes with damp limestone, and down at the far end, someone is whispering. You don't understand the words. They're sharp, clipped, almost rhythmic, like stone striking bone. You turn the corner, and there they are. 5 men, cloaked in red-dyed wool, their faces veiled not for modesty, but secrecy. In their hands, iron tools, hooks, hammers, a blade so thin it almost hums. You try to listen closer, but one of them snaps their fingers, not at you, but at another man standing behind you. In that moment, you realize you were never meant to hear this, because what they're speaking isn't Latin. It's something far older, a code, a dialect passed down from throat to throat, never written, never taught. This is the lost tongue of the Roman carnifex, the executioners, a language reserved for death. Most people think Roman executions were just brutal spectacles, lions, crosses, burning oil, and yes, they were brutal. But they were also theater, and theater needs stagehands. Silent operators, men who cleaned the blades, positioned the limbs, applied just enough pain to make a lesson, but not enough to ruin the show. The carnifices were those men, but they weren't ordinary workers. They were trained in something secret, something sacred, a role older than Rome itself. You see, the Roman state believed death was a legal and spiritual transition. It had to be done correctly. Every hanging, burning, disembowelment, each had rules. And within those rules, a special class of men evolved their own speech, a whisper language built for precision, for emotionless command, a dialect designed not to be understood by anyone else, because understanding it meant you were part of it. Historians didn't believe it at first, but in 1873, a strange lead tablet was unearthed near Lugdunum, modern-day Lyon, in Gaul. It didn't contain prayers or names. It was filled with phonetic syllables, arranged in patterns that matched no Latin syntax. The first line read, Grelth avin, uxortres noth, clavum ater pires. Translation: roughly, the woman with 3 names. The key goes through the eye. No scholar could decode it, until a Spanish ethnolinguist compared it with dialects spoken by ancient executioner clans in northern Iberia. Turns out, these weren't random sounds. They were technical instructions, words passed down not in writing, but through oral training. A lost code used to convey how a prisoner was to be killed, with what tools, in what order, and under what tone. Because for the carnifices, tone was everything. A public execution was a message. Was it meant to humiliate, terrify, redeem? The method mattered, and so they built words to reflect that. They had 3 verbs for cut, one for skin, one for tendon, one for hope. They had a separate tense to indicate the condemned had begged, another to suggest the crowd was unsympathetic. One term, virosmor, translated loosely, as the man has turned into a wall, meaning he would die standing, unflinching. That word was sacred, and feared, the most chilling part. The carnifices didn't just kill, they observed. They watched the prisoner in the hours before death, took notes, not on paper, but mentally, muttered back and forth in their coded tongue. They judged whether a man was ready, whether he had repented, whether his execution would satisfy the gods. Because to them, each death was a kind of offering, not just to Rome, but to something older and darker. Some historians believe this language, let's call it morte sermo, or speech of death, was a survival from pre-Roman tribes, perhaps even from the Near East. Whatever its origin, it was a secret passed from master to apprentice, sealed by ritual. A man could not become a full executioner until he had memorized the 12 hidden verbs, each representing a different aspect of the soul's severance from flesh. If he spoke them wrong, he'd be killed. Not out of punishment, but because misuse was believed to curse the death itself, causing the spirit to linger, restless inside the place of execution. The morte sermo wasn't just for execution, it was also used for rehearsal. In the depths of the Colosseum, just before a big spectacle, carnifices would walk the floor with rope dummies and mutter practice sentences to one another. One man would say, "Vico menes altrea," the man walks with shame, and the others would nod, adjusting the body's angle to capture the audience's line of sight. Another might whisper, "Desco rallum in ties," drop the blood on the altar, and the team would position the head for maximum splash effect against the central shrine of Nemesis. There are even rumors, preserved in 9th century Arabic texts, that a few emperors consulted the carnifices before major campaigns. Why? Because the executioners were the only ones who truly understood fear. They could tell you if a man would break in battle, if a general had weakness in his gait, if a senator was bluffing in the Senate. Their language, cold, clipped, forensic, was not poetic, but it was precise. What happened to morte sermo? It disappeared, not because it failed, but because it became too dangerous. After Christianity rose, the idea of secret death priests with their own tongue terrified the bishops. By 415 AD, under Honorius, a decree was passed. All executioners must be publicly named, all whispered commands forbidden, all speech near the condemned to be in Latin, and Latin only. Anyone caught speaking in Codex of Damnation would be burned alive. Only one manuscript remains, locked away in a private collection in Prague, allegedly smuggled from a ruined monastery in northern Italy. Inside are 27 phrases, annotated by a mad monk who believed the language could summon spirits. One of them reads, "Palthanem, invec, aram, destri," which he translated as, "Do not weep near the condemned, it will follow you home." So if you're ever in an ancient Roman ruin, and you hear a whisper that sounds like broken Latin, clipped short, sharp like bone against steel, walk away. Don't try to understand it. Don't try to record it. Because some words aren't meant to be repeated. Hey guys, close your eyes. You're walking through a ruin, not one of the big ones, not the Colosseum, not Pompeii, somewhere forgotten. A collapsed villa, half-eaten by ivy, tucked behind a sheep pasture in southern Gaul. You notice a strange depression in the earth, circular, like a small arena. In the center, fused to the stone by centuries of rust, lies a broken metal arm. At first, you think it's a sculpture, but then you see the joints articulated, engineered, and a faint inscription, worn almost smooth by rain and time. It says, "Gladius, she test batch." You stare at it, heart slowing, breath catching, because this isn't a soldier's relic. It's something else, something Rome tried to erase. A secret experiment, an army that never bled, because it was never alive. You've just found evidence of the artificial gladiators. It sounds impossible, like modern science fiction smuggled into the wrong century. But in the final 100 years of the empire, there were whispers. Whispers of engineers being summoned not to build roads, or baths, or siege weapons, but men, not flesh and blood, ones, metal ones, brass-sinewed, gear-hearted constructs designed to mimic the movements of trained fighters. The ancient texts don't call them robots, of course, but they use words like automa, bellator, self-moving warriors, and in one particularly obscure parchment, from the scriptorium of Ravenna. There's an eerie phrase. They practiced among themselves, without food, without pain, without stopping. Why would Rome even consider such madness? The answer, as always, is power. Gladiators were expensive. The best ones were celebrities, paid, pampered, and temperamental. They could rebel. They could die too soon. They could make political statements with the way they fought. Emperors hated unpredictability, and after the rebellion of Spartacus, even a century later, the Senate never forgot what trained gladiators could do in the wrong hands. So sometime around 240 AD, under the rule of the increasingly paranoid Emperor Gordian III, a strange commission was issued to a group of Syrian and Alexandrian inventors. Their task: create a machine that could simulate a gladiator's moves, swordplay, shield blocks, footwork, perfectly, tirelessly, and in silence. The surviving records are scattered and coded. A scrap of papyrus in a Cairo museum mentions wheels. A Roman engraving in Tunisia depicts a man lifting the faceplate of a human-shaped training dummy, revealing gears beneath. But the most damning evidence comes from an obscure fragment discovered in 1921 by a French archaeologist in Arles. Buried beneath layers of silt, he uncovered what looked like the remnants of a small amphitheater, unlike any others found in the region. It had no seats, no gates, no blood channels, just a central platform surrounded by grooved tracks, as if something or someone had circled it for hours, maybe days. On the wall, etched deeply and deliberately, was a single word: candidates. We didn't know what that meant at first. Then a researcher found it again. In an unrelated 5th century manuscript describing early Roman stage automata, theatrical machines used for religious plays, Candidus was one of the prototype names. Not for a weapon. For a character. A pale-skinned, featureless warrior meant to stand in for death. But in the hidden labs of Rome's fringe engineers, the character had been given form. Joints, balance, a wooden skull ringed with bronze. But these weren't crude puppets. Rome already had those. These things were reportedly autonomous, powered not by steam, but through a terrifyingly sophisticated system of weights, pressurized bladders, and what one translated scroll calls the breath of Vulcan, likely some early form of compressed air or controlled combustion. They didn't speak, they didn't feel, but they learned. That was the most disturbing part. One fragment, believed to be from the diary of a Roman military engineer, describes watching Candidus spar with a real man. At first, the automaton was clumsy, its movements slow, but by the third match, it began to anticipate. It sidestepped, it pivoted, it feinted, and in the final round, it struck the human opponent in the exact same spot the man had been guarding for the past 5 minutes. As if it had recorded the weakness. That engineer never returned to the testing arena. The experiment was never made public, and most records of it vanish after 253 AD, just before the rise of Emperor Valerian. Some say it was shut down after an incident, a massacre, maybe. Others whisper of a failed demonstration, where a prototype gladius unit attacked its handlers. But there's one theory that refuses to die: that the gladiator automata weren't just fighters, they were recorders, designed to observe real combat, store it, refine it, and then pass it on, not just as mimicry, but as legacy. One eerie legend from a 6th century monk named Algus tells of a metal-faced statue that was buried standing deep beneath the city of Ak. He writes that local peasants feared to plow the ground there, claiming that some nights you could hear the sound of footsteps, not heavy, human ones, but light, measured, as if a man with no breath was still practicing beneath the earth. Could Rome really have built artificial warriors? We've underestimated them before. We know they had sophisticated plumbing, surgery, even programmable theater machines. Why not autonomous combatants? The deeper question is, why did they try to hide it? Was it shame? A threat to their warrior culture? Or was it fear? Fear that something they made had kept moving long after the empire fell. One final, chilling clue comes from a 10th century Arabic chronicle, describing the ruins of a Roman fort in North Africa. The explorer writes, "Among the sand-choked rooms, we found a chamber sealed by iron. Inside, a man-shaped thing with no eyes, holding a broken sword, and wearing a tunic of chain that had not rusted. Its mouth was open, but not carved. And from within came a faint hiss, like a sigh waiting to finish. If even part of this is true, then Rome's darkest legacy wasn't conquest or cruelty. It was their attempt to create a perfect killer, and then bury it. Deep enough, they hoped, that no one would ever dig it up. Hey guys, you wake up somewhere unfamiliar. The air is dry, coppery. There's a weight on your chest that isn't fear. Not yet, but something close. The smell around you is wrong. Smoke, boiled leather, old blood. You blink and realize you're in a trench, but not the kind you know from modern war. This one's dug in red dirt, ancient, hemmed in by stacked shields and crude palisades. All around, Roman soldiers lie silent, not dead, not asleep, just watching. Their eyes are open, but distant. Their skin, too pale. Their lips chapped, but strangely slick. You crawl forward, looking for an officer, anyone in command, and that's when you see it. In the center of the trench, on a crude wooden altar, blackened by fire, sits something that shouldn't be. Not an idol, not a standard. It's a corpse, mangled, smiling, wearing the laurel crown of a Roman deity. And one by one, as the wind moans over the desert, the soldiers rise slowly, reverently, and begin to eat. This is not a legend you'll find in your school textbooks. It's barely a whisper in even the darkest corners of ancient writing. But in the surviving records of a Syrian scribe, his notes smuggled across centuries and buried in a monastery vault, there is mention of a Roman force sent east of Edessa in 161 AD, not to fight, not to build, but to worship. They were called cohors obscura, the hidden cohort. Officially, they didn't exist. No enlistment records, no pay orders, no commemorative inscriptions. But they were real, because once, just once, they came back in the second year of Marcus Aurelius' reign. Rome had begun to expand eastward again, encroaching into territories sacred to ancient Persian and Mesopotamian cults. To secure these lands, they formed a special detachment composed of veterans, mystics, and prisoners condemned to die. Men who, as one record puts it, had nothing to lose, and nothing left to believe. Their mission wasn't conquest, it was communion. Their orders were to carry a god, not Mars, not Jupiter, but a forgotten desert deity, resurrected from pre-Roman, Babylonian ruins. Its name has been lost, but fragments survive. Or Azamar, or, as one Greek philosopher nervously scrawled, the one who eats time. The soldiers were told it was an experiment, a new faith to unify the eastern provinces. But what it became was a sickness. They built shrines, small at first, then bigger, then elaborate, with inner chambers, torches that never went out, and ritual feasts held not by priests, but by themselves. The god was never seen, but always present, always whispering, and then the sacrifices began. At first animals, then prisoners. Then, according to one chilling clay tablet found near Nisibis themselves, it wasn't madness, it was method. The cohort believed, or had been made to believe, that consuming the divine body would grant them invincibility. That by eating part of the god, they would become its limbs, its hands, its teeth. The ritual was called menjicatio et, the eternal chewing. And as grotesque as it sounds, the horror wasn't just the cannibalism. It was that it worked. Accounts from terrified Parthian scouts describe Roman soldiers who couldn't die. Men who walked into arrow storms and came out untouched. Warriors who fought for days without sleep, their mouths always stained red, their voices never raised above a whisper. They moved in eerie silence, never breaking ranks, never speaking Roman, only chanting in low syllables, in a language no one could recognize. But the price was enormous. As the months passed, the survivors of the cohort began to change. Not just in mind, in form. Their skin grew stretched, waxy. Their eyes shrank into dark sockets. One chronicler from a nearby village writes, "They did not walk as men do, but like beasts who remembered being men. Food no longer nourished them. Wine turned to ash on their tongues. Only flesh, divine flesh, gave them clarity. And so they returned to the altar, again and again, consuming what little remained of their god, until one day there was nothing left, and they turned on each other. By the time a Roman legion was sent to investigate their silence, it was too late. The camp was empty, the altar smashed, tents torn, no bodies, just symbols carved into stone, deeply, as if by broken nails. A single sentence repeated over and over. "We are still hungry." The commander who led the relief force, Marcus Didius Gallus, never spoke of what he saw, but in a private letter to his wife, discovered centuries later in a collapsed villa in Dalmatia, he wrote, "They were not gone. We walked through the ruins, and we felt them breathing, not around us, inside us. Something had climbed into us. Through the silence, it was believed the survivors scattered, not back to Rome, not to any city, but into the deserts, the hills, the cracks in the earth, to wait, to digest." Some say that during the Great Plague of 165, when entire towns were wiped out, and Roman priests cried of a curse that made men eat their own kin, the echoes of the Cohors Obscura were heard again, faint singing, long into the night, and gnawed bones arranged in spiral shapes outside village walls. But what chills the blood most is a discovery made not in ancient times, but in 1987, when a team of Italian archaeologists unearthed a tomb in Cappadocia bearing Roman military symbols carved into basalt. Inside were 7 sarcophagi, each sealed with molten lead, and in each, a withered body in perfect military attire, their mouths open, their tongues removed, and a strip of blackened parchment lodged in their chests. Every scroll bore the same words, etched in a language still undeciphered, except for the final line, "He fed us. We wait to feed him." Whatever they became, the legion that ate its own god did not die. It evolved, it transcended death, and somewhere, in the forgotten corners of empire and memory, it still chews.